The storm came without mercy. One moment the mountains stood dark and still, and the next they vanished under a roaring wall of white. Snow fell so thick it erased the path behind every step, turning the wilderness into a frozen trap. Caroline fought the wind with trembling legs. Her breath sharpened her chest, her heart pounding with fear. She had been traveling for days, crossing miles of rough land to reach a future promised in letters, a new life, a husband she had never met. Hope had pushed her forward. Now the storm threatened to bury that hope forever. Her horse-drawn carriage had broken down hours ago. The driver had turned back, promising to find help, but the storm swallowed him whole. Caroline was alone. The cold cut through her coat like knives. Her fingers burned, then went numb. Her cheeks stung until she could no longer feel them. Each step through the deep snow drained what little strength she had left. The mountains stretched endlessly around her, silent and cruel, and the dark forest offered no comfort. Panic crept into her chest as her knees weakened. She feared she would fall and never rise again. Then she saw it, a faint glow flickering through the snow, a cabin, small and weathered, standing against the storm like it refused to surrender. Warm golden light spilled from its window, soft and steady, like a promise. Caroline fixed her eyes on it, clinging to that light, as if it were the last thread tying her to life. She adjusted the heavy trunk strap to her back and forced her feet to move again. With every step, she whispered a desperate prayer, begging that someone would be inside. Inside the cabin, Thomas sat near the fire, feeding logs into the flames. The wood cracked and popped, filling the quiet space with warmth. His elderly father, Samuel, sat nearby, humming softly while mending old tools with steady hands. Life in the mountains was simple and lonely. The cabin stood far from towns, surrounded by snow and trees that seemed to stretch forever. Thomas had grown used to the silence, the long winters, and the weight of responsibility that came with caring for his father. Still, that night felt different. The storm outside was fierce, the kind that did not forgive mistakes. A sudden sound cut through the howl of the wind, a dull knock. Then another. Thomas froze, his chest tightening. He raised a hand to signal his father to stay seated. Moving carefully, he stepped toward the door and peered through the frost-covered window. Through the swirling snow, he saw a lone figure swaying on unsteady feet. A woman, wrapped in heavy fabric, barely standing against the storm. Without hesitation, Thomas reached for the door. The moment he opened it, wind and snow burst inside, stealing the warmth from the room. The woman stumbled forward, her voice shaking as she cried out for help. Thomas caught her before she fell and pulled her inside, slamming the door shut behind them. Samuel hurried over with blankets as Thomas guided the woman to the fire. Her face was pale, her lips cracked, her eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. She collapsed onto the floor, shivering violently, clutching her arms to her chest. Thomas knelt beside her and wrapped his hands around her frozen fingers, holding them close to the heat. He spoke gently, his voice calm and steady, telling her she was safe now. Samuel draped thick blankets over her shoulders and offered a kind smile that eased some of the terror in her eyes. Slowly, the fire's warmth began to reach her limbs. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not only from the cold, but from the relief of knowing she had survived. The storm raged on outside, battering the cabin walls, but inside, time slowed. Minutes stretched into an hour as Caroline sat wrapped in blankets, sipping hot tea Thomas had prepared. Her hands trembled as she held the cup, but life was returning to her body. She looked around the small cabin, taking in the rough wooden walls, the firelight, and the two strangers who had saved her. Gratitude filled her eyes, mixed with curiosity and uncertainty. She had come seeking a new life, and instead had nearly lost everything. Thomas spoke little, allowing her to rest. Samuel watched quietly, his presence calm and reassuring. When Caroline finally found her voice, she told them her name. Thomas introduced himself, then his father. The conversation was careful at first, broken by the wind outside and the crackle of the fire. Caroline explained her journey, the letters that promised a future, the broken carriage, and the blizzard that forced her into the mountains. Thomas listened closely, his gaze steady, understanding the fear she carried. As the night deepened, Caroline's shivering eased. Thomas prepared a small bed for her near the fire, ensuring she would stay warm. Samuel nodded in approval, murmuring about the kindness that sometimes appeared when people needed it most. Snow piled high against the cabin walls, but inside a fragile sense of hope took root. Thomas remained nearby, watching over her as she drifted into uneasy sleep, her dreams tangled with fear and relief. Thomas sat by the embers long after the cabin grew quiet. His thoughts wandered through the years he had spent in solitude, the predictable rhythm of his days, and the responsibility that defined his life. Now a stranger slept by his fire, brought to his door by a storm. Questions pressed heavily on his mind. Who was she beyond her fear? Could she survive life in such a remote place? And could he, a man shaped by isolation, make room for someone new? Morning arrived slowly. The storm had weakened, leaving the mountains buried under fresh snow. Pale sunlight filtered through the frost-covered window, casting soft light across the cabin. Caroline stirred, stiff and sore, but alive. Gratitude filled her chest as she rose and wrapped herself in the blankets. Thomas offered a warm breakfast, simple but filling, and Samuel assisted quietly. As they shared the meal, a cautious sense of calm settled between them. Outside, the world stood silent and white, untouched and dangerous. Inside, the cabin felt warm and steady. Caroline watched Thomas move with quiet confidence, tending the fire and stacking wood. She saw the strength in his actions and the care he showed his father. This place, once terrifying, now felt like shelter. She realized the storm had not only saved her life, but placed her in the path of something unexpected. As the day unfolded, the snow glittered under the weak sun. Thomas spoke of repairing her broken cart, and Caroline listened closely, unsure what the next step in her journey would be. She had come seeking one future, but the storm had changed everything. Sitting by the fire, surrounded by warmth and cautious kindness, she felt a question forming in her heart. The answer, she sensed, would change her life forever. The morning settled into the cabin with a quiet calm that felt almost unreal after the violence of the storm. Snow lay thick against the walls, pressing the world into silence. Caroline moved slowly, her body sore, but her step steadier than the night before. The fear that had once tightened her chest had loosened, replaced by a cautious sense of safety. She watched Thomas from across the room as he worked, noticing how the mountains seemed to live in his movements. Every action was careful and sure, shaped by years of surviving harsh winters and long days alone. Samuel sat near the window, his hands folded, his eyes thoughtful. He spoke gently, asking Caroline about her family and where she had come from. She answered honestly, telling him about the town she left behind, the letters that promised a better future, and the courage it took to leave everything she knew. Samuel listened with quiet respect, nodding slowly as if he understood the weight of such a choice. When she finished, he told her that storms had a way of bringing truth into the open, forcing people to face who they really were. After breakfast, Thomas suggested they step outside to assess the damage left by the storm. Caroline hesitated, the memory of the blizzard still fresh in her mind, but she agreed. Bundled in layers, she followed him into the cold. The air was sharp, biting at her lungs, but the sky was clear. The forest stood still, heavy with snow. Every branch bowed under its weight. Thomas showed her where the wind had shifted the drifts, explaining how to read the land and predict danger. His voice was calm and steady, grounding her as they walked. They reached the broken carriage not far from the cabin. Snow covered most of it, but the damage was clear. A wheel had cracked, the wood splintered from the strain of the cold. Caroline's heart sank as she imagined being stranded again. Thomas knelt beside it, brushing away snow, examining the damage with a practiced eye. He told her it could be fixed enough to travel, but it would take time. The roads would be dangerous for days. Caroline nodded, understanding what he was not saying. She would need to stay. Back inside, warmth wrapped around them once more. Caroline helped Samuel prepare food while Thomas gathered supplies. The work gave her a sense of purpose she had been missing since leaving home. She learned quickly, watching how Samuel moved with patience and care despite his age. He told her stories of the mountains, of winters that tested the strongest men, and of the cabin's history. The walls seemed to hold those stories, whispering of endurance and quiet strength. As the hours passed, Caroline and Thomas spoke more freely. She asked him about his life, about why he stayed so far from towns and people. He told her about his mother, gone too soon, and how the mountains had become both refuge and burden. He spoke of responsibility, of choosing to stay for his father, and of the loneliness that came with that choice. Caroline listened closely, feeling a connection form that surprised her. His words carried honesty, not bitterness, and she respected him for it. That afternoon, Thomas began repairing the carriage. Caroline watched from the doorway, offering tools when needed. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he worked, his breath rising in steady clouds. She noticed the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the patience in his hands as he shaped new wood to replace what was broken. There was comfort in watching someone capable and calm, someone who faced problems directly without complaint. It eased something inside her that had been knotted tight for days. By evening, the carriage stood stronger than before, though still rough. Thomas explained it would be enough to travel when the weather allowed. Caroline thanked him, her gratitude deep and sincere. Samuel watched them with quiet eyes, seeing more than either of them said. As darkness fell, the fire was lit once more, casting familiar shadows across the room. Dinner was shared in comfortable silence, broken only by small smiles and simple words. Later, as the wind began to rise again, Caroline sat by the fire, mending a tear in her coat. Thomas sat across from her, sharpening tools, the steady sound filling the space between them. Their eyes met now and then, holding just a moment longer each time. There was no rush, no need to speak what both were beginning to feel. The cabin held them gently, as if aware of the fragile bond forming within its walls. That night, Caroline struggled to sleep. The quiet felt different now, heavy with thoughts. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking of the life she had planned and the one unfolding before her. The letters that had guided her journey felt distant, almost unreal. She wondered about the man she was meant to meet, and whether fate had already chosen another path for her. The thought frightened her, but it also brought a strange sense of peace. Morning brought fresh snowfall, and a sky heavy with clouds. Another storm threatened, though not as fierce as the first. Thomas decided they would stay inside, conserving supplies and strength. Caroline helped Samuel organize the pantry, learning what could be stretched and what must be saved. The work was simple, but it bound them together in shared purpose. She felt less like a guest and more like part of the household. As the storm passed through, Caroline and Thomas talked by the fire. She admitted her fears, the uncertainty that had followed her since leaving home. Thomas listened without judgment, offering understanding rather than answers. He told her that the mountains taught patience, that sometimes survival meant waiting and trusting the path ahead. His words stayed with her, settling deep in her heart. Over the next few days, routines formed. Caroline learned how to gather wood, how to cook over the fire, how to read the sky for signs of change. Thomas guided her without control, allowing her to find her footing. Samuel watched with quiet pride, seeing life return to the cabin in ways he had not expected. Laughter began to echo softly through the rooms, warming the space in ways the fire alone could not. Gossip. One evening, as they sat together watching the flames, Samuel spoke of the future. He asked Caroline what she wanted, truly wanted, beyond the plans written in letters. The question caught her off guard. She thought carefully before answering, realizing how much had changed. She spoke of wanting safety, respect, and a place where she belonged. Her voice was steady, but her heart raced. Thomas listened closely, his gaze thoughtful. When Samuel excused himself for the night, silence settled between Caroline and Thomas. The fire crackled softly. Thomas spoke at last, telling her she was welcome to stay as long as she needed. There was no pressure in his voice, only sincerity. Caroline felt tears sting her eyes, overwhelmed by the kindness offered without demand. She thanked him, knowing the words were not enough to express what she felt. As she lay down to sleep that night, the cabin felt different. It no longer seemed like a temporary shelter, but a place of possibility. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the mountains in white. Inside, warmth and trust had taken hold. Caroline drifted into sleep with a quiet hope she had not known before, unaware that the hardest choices were still ahead, and that the bond forming between her and Thomas would soon be tested in ways neither could imagine. The storm that followed was gentler than the first, but it lingered longer, wrapping the mountains in a slow, steady fall of snow. Days blended together, marked by the rise and fall of the fire and the rhythm of shared work. Caroline woke each morning with a sense of purpose she had not felt in years. The fear that once followed her every step had faded, replaced by quiet determination. She was no longer simply surviving. She was learning how to live in this place. Thomas noticed the change in her. She moved with more confidence now, her hands steady as she worked, her eyes alert to the world around her. She asked questions, listened carefully, and remembered what she was taught. The mountains no longer seemed to frighten her. Instead, she treated them with respect. Thomas felt something shift inside himself as he watched her grow stronger. He had spent so many years believing solitude was his fate that he had forgotten how deeply human presence could matter. Samuel, too, seemed lighter. He laughed more often, telling old stories by the fire, his voice filled with warmth. The cabin, once quiet and heavy with routine, now felt alive. Meals were shared with easy conversation. Even silence felt comfortable, no longer empty. Caroline had become part of their days without effort, as if she had always belonged there. One afternoon, the sky cleared completely for the first time since the blizzard. The snow sparkled under the sun, and the air felt crisp and clean. Thomas told Caroline it would soon be safe to travel. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Caroline nodded, her chest tightening. She had known this moment would come. The journey she had set out on was waiting for her beyond the mountains. That evening, Caroline sat alone by the fire, staring into the flames. Her thoughts raced. She remembered the letters that promised her a future with a man she had never met. She had believed in that promise, trusted it enough to cross dangerous land alone. But the mountains had given her something different, something real. She wondered if it was wrong to question the path she had chosen, or if the storm had revealed the truth she had been afraid to face. Thomas joined her quietly, sitting across from her. He did not speak at first. He sensed the weight of her thoughts and did not wish to disturb them. Finally, Caroline broke the silence. She spoke honestly, telling him about her doubts, her fears, and the confusion in her heart. She admitted that the future she once believed in now felt distant and uncertain. Thomas listened, his expression calm but serious. When she finished, he spoke slowly, choosing his words with care. He told her he never meant to stand in the way of her plans. He respected the courage it took to leave everything behind in search of a better life. But he also told her that storms sometimes redirected people for a reason, leading them to truths they could not see before. Caroline felt tears gather in her eyes. She thanked him for his honesty, for never pressuring her, for offering safety without expectation. That kindness, she realized, was what had touched her most deeply. It was not grand gestures or promises, but quiet consistency and respect. The next morning, Thomas finished preparing the carriage. The repairs were solid, the horse rested and ready. The road beyond the mountains would be difficult, but passable. Samuel helped Caroline pack her belongings, his movements slow but steady. He placed a small bundle in her trunk, food for the journey, insisting she take it. His eyes held a mix of pride and sadness. When the moment came to leave, the cabin stood silent, as if aware of what was about to change. Caroline stepped outside, breathing in the cold air. She turned to face Thomas and Samuel, her heart pounding. Words failed her. No farewell seemed sufficient for what they had given her. Samuel stepped forward first. He took her hands gently, telling her she would always be welcome there, that the cabin doors would never be closed to her. His voice trembled slightly and Caroline hugged him, holding on longer than she intended. Tears slipped down her cheeks, and she did not try to stop them. Thomas stood a short distance away, his expression unreadable. Caroline walked toward him, each step heavy. She looked up at him, searching his face. In that moment, she understood the choice before her. One path led forward to a life built on promises made by ink and paper. The other stood right here, built on shared hardship, kindness, and truth. Caroline took a deep breath. She spoke softly, but her voice was steady. She told Thomas she could not leave, not yet. She told him the storm had changed her, shown her what mattered. She admitted she did not know what the future held, but she knew she did not want to walk away from the life she had begun to build in that cabin. Thomas felt his breath catch. He had prepared himself to watch her go, believing that was the price of doing what was right. Hearing her words filled him with emotion he struggled to contain. He told her he could not promise an easy life. The mountains were harsh and the work was hard, but he promised honesty, respect, and a home built on trust. Caroline smiled through her tears. That was all she wanted. She did not need grand promises or distant dreams. She needed something real. She stepped closer, and Thomas placed a careful hand over hers. The touch was simple, but it carried everything they had not said. The carriage was unpacked, the horse was led back to the stable. The cabin door closed once more, not to shut the world out, but to hold something precious inside. That night the fire burned brighter than ever. Samuel watched the two of them with quiet satisfaction, knowing the storm had brought a gift he never expected. Weeks passed, and life settled into a new rhythm. Caroline learned more with each day, growing stronger and more capable. She and Thomas worked side by side, sharing laughter and quiet moments. Their bond deepened naturally, without rush. Love, Caroline learned, did not always arrive in dramatic ways. Sometimes it grew slowly, rooted in shared effort and understanding. One evening, as snow fell gently outside, Thomas spoke of the future. He spoke of expanding the cabin, of making it a true home. Caroline listened, her heart full. She shared her own dreams, no longer shaped by fear, but by hope grounded in reality. Samuel listened from his chair, smiling softly, content. The mountains remained harsh and unforgiving, but the cabin stood strong against them. It had weathered storms before, and would weather many more. Inside, warmth endured. Caroline often thought back to the night she stumbled through the blizzard, certain she would not survive. She understood now that the storm had not come to destroy her, but to guide her. Standing at the window one morning, watching the sunrise paint the snow in gold, Caroline felt a deep sense of peace. She had come to the mountains searching for a promised life. She had found something better, a home earned through courage, kindness, and choice. Thomas joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. Together they looked out at the land that had tested them and brought them together. The future remained uncertain, as all futures are, but they would face it together, grounded in trust and shared strength. And so, the cabin that once stood silent in the wilderness became a place of belonging, a place where a mail-order bride, trapped by snow and fate, found not only shelter, but purpose. A place where a lonely cowboy learned that opening his door also opened his heart. The storm had passed, but its gift endured, written into every shared day that followed.